Hello, everyone. I'm Captain Logan, and it's not Spawn year. It is day 44 of my comic review video day calendar. And once again, I lied about the publisher today. Originally, I had planned to move away from Marvel because I did 2 or 3 of those in a row, but I am, in fact, doing Marvel again. But we will definitely have a DC book tomorrow because this is going to be, I've decided, the first of kind of a 2-day miniseries here on Not Spawn Year. I'm going to do kind of a companion piece to this tomorrow, and you might be able to guess at what that is if you're at all familiar with early 90s DC Comics. I'm going to do a thing that's kind of tangentially related to this, but this is kind of a curiosity, kind of a weird thing that I've had in my collection a long time that I always kind of wondered about, but had never looked at. And it is Cyberspace 3000 #1. This looks immediately like kind of a knockoff book, kind of an underground indie thing where maybe somebody for some reason got the license to Galactus, but it's not actually a Marvel book, but it in fact is. This is a Marvel imprint. This is Marvel Comics UK, and I don't know about anything else they published, but this is very indicative of early 90s Marvel jumping to the future, doing a futuristic book with familiar characters or characters that are connected to familiar characters in order to sell a book, but trying to find some way to not just repeat ourselves and do something new, create some new characters, but still put in the familiar so that somebody might actually buy the thing. So 2099 is like that. Marvel 2 with Spider-Girl is like that. And now we have Cyberspace 3000. Galactus is on the cover, but it is a giant reveal that he's in this book at the end. So it's kind of unfortunate that the book has to sell itself on that. But then the question is, would anybody buy this if there wasn't something that you knew about already on the cover? So I kind of understand that from a marketing standpoint, and it didn't work anyway because this series only got 8 issues, and it's kind of sad because you can tell that there's guys working on this that are really trying their darndest to do something a little different, something that's real in their wheelhouse that they really want to write. It does read a tad generic and pretty derivative, and somewhat admittedly, when you look at the introduction to the letters pages at the end of this. Of course, there aren't any letters yet because it's the first issue, but a lot of #1s will do this where you get to the back and there's a letter from the writer and or the artist. Thanks so much for looking at this. We promise it's not going to suck. We're going to do our best to make something really cool that you haven't seen before. Please keep buying the book. That way we can stay employed, that kind of thing. And also write us some letters. And this has that too. This is written by Gary Russell and Steve Tappan, who both profess at the back here, or at least Russell does, but talking also about his artist, that these guys are really big Star Trek fans and wanted to do something kind of Star Trek-y for Marvel. All the things that are related to Star Trek, borrowed from Star Trek, are real clear and obvious here. But it's real interesting because this comes out in 1993, and these guys almost apologize for how similar they think this is to Deep Space Nine, because that show had not even been announced yet, they claim in the letters pages, when they started writing this book and when it was greenlit by Marvel. So they say they're kind of scrambling, or Russell, they're kind of scrambling in the issues after this to make sure that it goes its own direction and is doing new original things. They didn't do that on purpose. So this is in fact set on a space station, of course, in the far-flung future. It's got a starship captain, a female starship captain, because it's way in the future. So it's really progressive because it's got a woman, even though she's wearing a super skin-tight outfit, so that it is revealing and leaves nothing to the imagination and looks like an X-Men costume. And I should say, by the way, one of the things that this feels derivative about is just that it looks so X-Men, to the point where characters are wearing a symbol on their outfits, some of them anyway, this guy here, that makes it really look like they must be future X-Men. But it's actually a cross, I guess, or like a plus sign with a circle around it instead of an X, but then some of them are sideways, so they look like X's. So it's very confusing, and I don't really know what the point of that and is in what it means. It probably has some sort of religious connotation because there's a lot of religion in this book. It has that in common with Deep Space Nine, which is maybe just a natural thing to do, to be fair, when you set your series on a space station, where instead of a group of basically military folks going off into space, exploring things, or uh, trying to protect their planet. Make sure to make good relationships with other alien races. You actually have a living and breathing society, and you would want to deal with all of the cultural aspects and social issues that would go into that. This is a lot more like Babylon 5 than it is Deep Space Nine. And of course, those two shows both happen, as far as anybody can tell, completely independent of each other, although there has been talk over the years of one ripping off the other, somebody finding out that the other studio is working on a space show set on a space station. I don't even remember which was more accused of taking off of the other one. I think it is more people claiming that Babylon 5 is ripping off Deep Space Nine. Maybe the other way around. I don't remember. It's not important. They're two really different shows, and this, again, does have some Star Trek hallmarks. Right at the beginning, it's got kind of an homage to Star Trek, where it kind of gets up front and says, yes, this is a space epic. Yes, it's going to be more of a relatively hard sci-fi sort of thing. It's not going to have a lot of, fantasy trappings, magic trappings. It's going to maybe explore human condition stuff a little bit more than something like a Star Wars would, that kind of thing. But right away, it says space used to be the final frontier, but now mankind has kind of tamed it or explored a lot of it, and it's not really that big of a deal anymore that we're in space, because we have been for centuries. And there's also a line that's kind of curious that says mankind or what's left of it. Ooh, so my assumption is we're not on Earth anymore, that human beings have been, like we do in so much futuristic, somewhat dystopian stuff. This isn't super dystopian. All these characters, at least the people that work together on a space station, seem to get along okay, but there's a lot of infighting, and with some of the citizens on the space station, there's various groups and factions that don't get along, just like Babylon 5. And my assumption is that humanity has been kind of scattered across the universe. I also am not real familiar with the typical status quo of the 31st century Marvel, because that year or that century is not chosen at random. We've already got a precedent for things set in that period. And so this is it feels kind of like a spin-off, if anything, of the original Guardians of the Galaxy, which is already set there. And I'm considering maybe reviewing the first issue of that, which I own most, if not all of, that I bought out in a collection once and was kind of curious about it. And I've never read past the first couple issues of that, but that has the original comic Yondu with the big, kind of mohawk head. But he's almost nothing like the Yondu from the Guardians of the Galaxy movies. And that premise is pretty different. That cast is different. It's not a cast of characters. It's a lot more no nonsense in comparison to what we think about now as Guardians of the Galaxy. The popular version of that now, based more on the Abnett and Lanning thing. But anyway, so there are a couple of references in this to things from that. I hesitate saying spin-off because there aren't any characters from that here, but again, there's a couple of references. But it does feel that way only in, like, in anything that's 2099 feels like a Spider-Man 2099 spin-off, because that's the first thing, I'm pretty sure, that's set in that year and that continuity. Again, technically the continuity is still 616. This is supposed to be the future of that. It's up to you to decide if we're actually building toward that with regular Marvel. If at this point, with all the other continuity we've got up to 2023 with Marvel, we can even believe that this is where it's all going. You know, again, a future that looks very much like the one that a lot of people are imagining in the early 90s. The title itself is curious. Cyberspace 3000. We're really interested in the impending internet, which is just now starting to get popular and in people's homes through AOL. More than anything, the first movie trailer ever put on the internet will be just the following year with Star Trek Generations. So I say just beginning to get popular relatively. Most people still don't have the internet in their house. Obviously, it's very, very slow dial-up. You don't even have major staples like eBay and Yahoo and things like that yet. But the only reason I'm talking about the internet at all is because it's called cyberspace, probably because that's kind of a popular term that's starting to pop up. But this doesn't have really anything to do with the internet as far as I can tell yet. I mean, perhaps they will find that these characters have something akin to that. All we know is, like, what is cyber about it beyond we're in space and we have a computer that talks to us? Their ship, it's a space station, but they keep referring to it as a ship, which is weird. It does seem to function a little bit more like an Enterprise than a DS9. And if they had started writing this post DS9, I imagine that whole thing would be real different, because this captain, whose name is Jennifer Cabre Rios, just rolls off the tongue. That's funny because there's a Rios now in Star Trek, if you count Picard as canon. And anyway, these names are not memorable. A lot of them are kind of hard to get your lips around. But Captain Cabre Rios, Captain Jennifer, she, at the beginning of this, is working out of a bridge that looks like kind of a standard starship bridge, and I'm really confused on a first read. I had to thumb through this again because we keep calling it a ship, but we're looking at a space station. So for a minute, I thought she had a ship and there was also a space station, and we were dealing with those things. And then she keeps talking to something called Sol, and we keep talking about the inhabitants of Sol. So I thought there was also a planet involved, and we kept hailing it, but none of that is true. It's all one thing. But she's working on a bridge that, again, feels more like a starship bridge. I don't know how the station travels, like if it just is kind of stationary, but because we keep saying ship, I'm imagining it is traveling with this just huge complement of citizens that live on it like it's a planet. So there's questions I have that I'm sure would be answered in later issues, although because it only got 8, I don't know if all of them would be answered necessarily, but I'll go ahead and break down the story. So right at the beginning of this, you have some kind of weird energy wave. Something is happening that our sensors, we're going to be talking very much in Star Trek terms, that our sensors are not picking up, and it seems like there's nothing outside. So a pretty standard Star Trek mystery. It is so foreign, it is so strange, we can't even, our instruments don't even pick it up at all. And then all of a sudden, the whole bridge section gets shucked out. And I guess it's not just the bridge. It must be more area even around it, because we're told later that half the crew, well, maybe not. It's hard to say, because maybe it's not all just crew that lives on this ship or station. So it might be that a lot of the crew actually is working on the bridge, and then everywhere else in the ship or the space station, it's a little bit more sparse with that, because, again, there are whole different cultures living on this thing. So I'm not really sure, but we're told that I think just crew. I don't think it's half of everybody on the station is dead, but we're told half the crew has died, and it's nuts. It's a big deal. And Captain Rios, or Cabre Rios, seems to have died, and then mysteriously she shows back up. She she's back on the ship and she falls over and she is resuscitated by our kind of typical quirky doctor who's of some other race, and he's real tiny and stout, and makes references to earlier 20th century things that he's confused about and doesn't understand. At one point he says he never quite figured out what a beatnik is. So there's odd, quirky writing choices like that. And then trying to hook you in because so much of this is alien and foreign, and so we have to occasionally mention something you've heard of before. That's, again, also partly why we have things like Galactus here right at the end. And so the big mystery is, where did she go? What happened to her? And why don't the sensors read her now? So she's been changed or transformed or something, I have to assume, because the equivalent of the medical tricorder is reading her as air, or reading the air around her. There's nothing there, but she's still acting totally normal. She's not out of character, and I like that she's not immediately. They don't immediately turn on her and throw her in the brig or anything, because she seems to be, I mean, maybe they're taking a risk with this, but she seems to be herself, and so she's put back in command. And meanwhile, there are some religious zealots. There's this whole kind of cult or religious order, depending on how you look at it. It's hard to say, but they seem kind of dangerous. So I'm going to go to, they're probably a cult. These guys, this read kind of generic as I was reading it, but as I'm talking about it, it seems kind of interesting. I may look at more of this just out of morbid curiosity to see where it goes. And it's not terribly written, certainly. I don't love the art. It's pretty sketchy. It's pretty simplistic. And once again, we've got another book that just does not want to put anything in the backgrounds. This feels pretty rushed. And being a first issue for a thing that you don't know if you're going to sell, I think you want to maybe spend a little bit more time on this. Some people might look at this, especially back then, and say, because this is pretty typical for a lot of early 90s art. I think we're starting to get a little bit lazy. I think some people would look at this and just call it stylistic, stylized, but I feel like Rob Liefeld and to some degree Jim Lee, because I think there's a lot of people aping Jim Lee but not being as stylish and complex in line work as Jim Lee was doing even at this point, that turn in things that go a little bit more on the Liefeld side of stuff. Not that I think that Liefeld is the worst artist ever, but I think there's just some corners that get cut, and we overcompensate by just putting a bunch of random details on superhero costumes, which this does a little bit too, like Cabri Rios's suit. Let me try to get a good image of her. Has those real stereotypical arm straps that Liefeld likes. She's got to have a jacket that doesn't go down very far, and once again, it just looks like an X-Men costume. She's got the double belt. She's got kind of an 80s. You're not seeing what I'm seeing right now. Pardon me. She's got kind of an 80s haircut. She looks kind of like Dazzler with that. And anyway, so as I was saying, you've got this kind of, these religious zealots, this kind of cult that worships a god that is kind of a ruthless god, not one that cares about the people that worship it. And we come to find, I think, maybe that the god that they're worshiping is in fact Galactus, or at least whatever their leader is talking to when he goes to the statue with the big hand. It predicts the coming of doom, that something is on its way, and it gives their leader the instructions that he needs to go to the rest of the ship, the rest of the space station, and spread the good word that the end of things is nigh. And right at the end of the issue, Galactus shows up. So again, something is actually talking to him. He's not schizophrenic. It's not in his head. He's not imagining this. There is something actually talking to him. And this is consistent, apparently, where Cabre Rios immediately drops everything else she's doing and trying to figure out what attacked them, which is clearly related to this in some way. Or, well, I say clearly, maybe it's not. It's hard to say because there is a subplot with this insectoid species that's also on the ship that is testing a portal and just taking people they don't like. They're kind of bigots, taking people from other races. Like there's a cat race, and they grab one of them and throw it in as a experiment to see what is going on with this portal. And that's all we get of that. So I don't know if that's related to Galactus or how connected that is even to whatever sucked the captain out of the ship. But I assume there's some kind of correlation. Anyway, she goes, well, we've got to look into, after they have this big, huge fight, she goes, we've got to look into what the religious cultists are doing, because every time they make a prediction, it seems to come true, and this sounds real heavy, so we got to look into it. And then, like I said, they're well, I didn't mention this, but they're cut off for a while from the ship itself, which speaks to them. So I don't know if they've lost computer control or anything. They don't talk about that, but they just can't speak to Sol. When they say that, I'm assuming that because their ship is Sol 3, I assume that what they mean, and I guess it's probably named after Earth, right? Third rock from the sun, because the Earth isn't around anymore. We're not told that, but that's kind of the guess I'm making, that they're naming it after the planet that they used to exist on. And anyway, their ship finally starts, or whatever Sol is, finally starts talking to them again and says something is coming, just like the Zealots just said. And then Galactus is there and just says, I hunger. So, yay, we got Galactus. And and I'm biased, of course, but he's the best drawn thing in the book. Suddenly we've got more lines on a character, and it looks like he spent like 85% of his time drawing this and then 15 drawing the rest of it. So a little bit curious to see what's going on here. I did read that there are some other characters, like cosmic things that we're familiar with in Marvel, that also show up in just the 8 issues of this book. I should mention that Gary Russell had a long career writing audio dramas for Doctor Who, and he was a script editor on a couple of the Doctor Who spin-offs in the 2000s. So so Torchwood he worked on, and the what is that called? The Sarah. I have not thought about Doctor Who in a long time, so I cannot remember the name of that right now. But where is it? I can't find it. Anyway, but he worked on those things, and then I also wanted to mention that Steve Tappan, Sarah Jane Adventures, that's what it was. And then Steve Tappan was an artist primarily for Judge Dredd, and these are both UK guys, both English. I also wanted to mention that this cover is kind of interesting because there's this embossed thing that I didn't even realize it was doing. So when you look at this, it doesn't look like there's anything lenticular or any raised words, any or images, any embossed anything. And then if you run your finger along it, which I just happen to do picking up, it feels like there's something there's something there, something special about this cover. We did a lot of these kind of covers in the early 90s and in mid 90s, and I'm looking at this and going, but there's nothing here. Like, why does it have that? And then I don't know if it's going to show up on camera here, but if you show it in just the right, if you look at it, there it is. Actually, the glare is helping us this time. If you look at it in just the right light, Galactus is secretly saying, I hunger. Isn't that weird that it's there just for that? And we also did an embossed thing on like right around the hilt of the captain's gun here. Let me see if there's anything special there that I missed. This is riveting, I'm sure. No, not that I can see. I don't know why they did that. But anyway, so Galactus is saying, I hunger. But you can't tell that unless you put it in the right light. Isn't that odd? Like, it's kind of neat. But I don't know why it's a secret. I mean, he's Galactus. Like, He's always hungry. And apparently he has a herald that is called the Dark Angel, and we don't see that character. We're just told at the bottom that's supposed to be kind of the hook to get us to come back. Next, meet Galactus's latest herald, Dark Angel. And I read that that is a recreation of a character that's also in 31st century Marvel stuff, maybe in the original Guardians. I'm not sure. But anyway, this was a really interesting read, actually, and I may at some point. Did I really just bend part of this book? I just smashed this. It's not a big deal. It's okay, but I just created a little bit of a nick in the spine here. I hate making spine damage on my comics. Like, it's late. I guess I'm tired. I smacked this against my my arm of my mic arm. Oops. Anyway, that was Cyberspace 3000 #1. Some point I'll check out the other ones. I don't know if I'll review them. I don't know that anybody's going to care. But I really appreciate you watching, and I will see you again tomorrow. And I've already chosen what I'm going to do. And like I said, some of you guys might be able to guess it. So your clues are, it's also an early 90s comic from probably around the same time, 92, 93. I don't have the date in front of me. And it is tangentially related to this in some way, and that will become very clear when I tell you what it is. But anyway, I'll see you again tomorrow. Thanks so very much for watching again, and happy reading.